So we felt it's very, so we felt that it's important for us to actually talk about what actually triggers us to be the way we are as the Herero people and also the Nama people. And this is just a background, not necessarily like a lecture series, just to have an idea of what actually happened at a genocide, what happened to the people emotionally, psychologically, and also physically, and how that affects our psyche, and how and why generations later, I mean, it's 117 years later, why it has a specific effect now, and why maybe there's an uproar about not agreeing with the current situations of what's happening with the two governments, or why we feel left out. So I'll just talk a little bit about that. So next slide, please. The first thing I do want to talk about is trauma. When we talk about trauma, for someone to experience trauma, you need what I call the 3 E's. So there should be an actual event or series of events or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So if I were to give you a brief example right now, let's say everybody loves puppies, right? And I take a puppy right now, and I'm sorry, I might trigger someone right now. I just want to give that quickly. If I take a beautiful small puppy, maybe a husky, because I love huskies, and on video, I take that and I break its neck, somebody's gonna be super triggered, especially people who are very visual right now. Emotionally, they are triggered. Physically, they are triggered. They could have a breakdown, right? But we have ways of coping with that. Someone will refer you to a psychologist, a social worker, a therapist to help you cope with what you had just experienced, what you saw, so that you can live with your lived experiences of actually seeing this traumatic event happen in front of you. So that's an event, the experience that you feel, shivering, shaking, the shock, the horror, why I would do that. And the effects on that could be you have nightmares. It could be that you can't even cope anymore. It could be that when you see a dog on the street, you get scared, or you want to maybe rescue all the puppies. That's just a brief explanation of how trauma may react in someone's body, right? And what can trigger it. Now, looking back 117 years back, with things that were done, which we'll definitely want to talk about now. And you can go to the next slide, that causes the Herero and the Nama generations to react a specific way, because did we get therapy? Did we get counseling when we were going through these traumatic events? Did we get any counseling? Did we get any emotional support after the genocide era had lapsed? Yes, it was 4 years that was recorded, 1904 to 1908. But there was no real conversation on, okay, these atrocities had happened, and now let's start the journey of healing. How do we help you guys cope better? How do we help you guys become a better generation? Because if any unresolved issues or traumatic events causes us the way we are, and I'll definitely break that down. So I did explain a little bit some of the trauma responses that we may experience are increased aggression. You might be defensive because you don't want to be seen as emotionally unhealthy or strong, that you can't cope with emotions, that you can't cope with conflict. So you become aggressive, so that you just stare away anybody that's in front of you who's trying to maybe attack you, even if it's just perceived and maybe unperceived danger that you might have. So you want to just, it's a way of coping. We have increased vigilance or suspicion. I know growing up as an Herero person, every time you see a white person, you're told, you should greet them a specific way, you should be a specific way. Even if it's not told directly to you, you get to see the gestures of your parents or your grandparents, because this is learned behavior. And I didn't understand it at first. And once you probe, and we're also told you don't ask questions, which is also, it leads to why it happened. When it happened, you don't question the master, or you don't question the white oppressor. So if I question 100 years later, there's no response because there was no actual answer to that. So it's learned behavior. So trauma is just as well passed down the generations. So I become suspicious without actually understanding what's happening. At times there's an increase alcohol or drug intake as a way to cope, and just numb emotions because we don't know how to resolve any type of trauma or any type of pain, or if you have a conflict because you never saw someone around you, especially amongst these communities, deal with a specific traumatic event. You just see them numb it away, and half the time it was through homemade brews, just so that you sleep the day away and march on the next day, or soldier on, as we say, the next day. And sometimes there's a gnawing sense of time. There's a poor sense of future, or frequently because our ancestors or great grandparents did not know if they were going to live or not, especially during that genocide era. They didn't know, if I wake up today, is this going to be my last day? And there were so many things that happened. And unfortunately, right now, you get to see some of these behaviors where if I was to ask anybody, maybe my age, in my age group, or maybe the teenagers, what do you want to become? It's like, you don't get to think so much about it, because it's not something that your parents used to sit you down and say, you have to think about your future, you have to do this. They got that from their parents got that from there, because it's just survival of the fetus, right? And this is like extreme cases. I'm not saying every situation is similar, but this is like a communal response to what had happened that was passed down. I also want to talk about a quick study that was done on rats. I believe it was in the 1970s. It was an experiment. I need to circle back to his name, where you would have rats in a cage, right? Because a lot of the time when we do experiments, we want to first do it to see how we might also relate to that. You have rats, two parent rats, a female and a male. The one rat gets shock treatment. So they know if the light comes on, they're gonna get a shock. And they get a shock and then they get a treat, right? So this will happen, and then you get the one rat who doesn't get the treatment at all, which would be the father, right? And so they just get, the light is on, and then they get the food. So what happened is they would combine, they would have offsprings, but what happens to the offspring is every time that there's a red light on, they would have the same emotional, physical responses like the mother rats would have when they were startled by knowing that there's a shock coming. So this was interesting, because this talks to epigenetics on how trauma is passed down. So you have rats down the line who, when they see a red light, they react as if something is happening or it's coming, but they never lived through it themselves. So this is what we're trying to unpack about. Yes, the genocide happened then. Yes, I wasn't there. Somebody else was there, but why does it affect me somehow? Right now, epigenetics and a lot of theories are coming through to explain how we are affected because of what was experienced then, and how our body, how some of this is passed down through DNA. So we need to have these conversations. If you may, next slide, please. Next slide would be about so I want to quickly run through this, maybe not so fast, the characteristics, I call them characteristics of the genocide. So I want to talk about the pre-genocide. Who were we as a community? Who were we as a people? And I'm talking about the Herero people and the Nama people. The first thing, we were a group of ethnic people, you know. Yes, thank you so much, Carl Hone experiment. I appreciate that. Yes, we're an ethnic group. We were a communal group. I am because you are. We are that. We were that, or still are, right? Our setting, we used to mainly live in the rural areas because we are farmers. You know, we herd with cattle. Ideology, I mean, we believe in what we believe, our spiritual gods, ancestors. We lived, and that was our protective system. So when the genocide happened, which was done by the Germans at that time, we had to relocate, meaning that you had to move your village, you had to move to survive. You had families, you had livestock, mostly cattle. There was, because we were resisting, the water were poisoned so that we starve because of the extermination order that was there. And the ones that did survive were deported for hard labor, especially on the railroads when you're going to Lutherits, and a lot of them died. There were concentration camps, which was also not very, very great at all, because there's no great concentration camp, obviously. So the mode of relocation was actually deportation. You would be dragged, either whatever mode of transport was there, you just worked. I did read about a lot of the time people would get enough rice to survive, and those who didn't survive, then there were experiments on the skulls where their skulls had to be, taken for studies, So all of that, and then you had women who had to actually carve off the skin of their skulls or family members, and if they reacted or had an emotional breakdown to it, they were either whipped because they had to work. There was no time for emotion. So we were seen as barbarics or savages, yet the things that we had to do because we needed to survive was so hard, and you couldn't feel, you couldn't show emotion, you couldn't express. When you did, you would almost get punished for that. So this is unresolved. This trauma is internalized. Obviously, that might be passed down the generation. I mean, so there's a lot of killing that I spoke about. The systematic extermination, a lot of starvation, lynching, where you would have to see a loved one being hanged for maybe just stealing something. And so you just never knew when you were going to survive. So a lot of emotional, psychological, physical abuse happened. The communities were suppressed of their cultures. They couldn't practice their own culture because now you were set up in a system where you had to live to survive, and you knew someone was obviously gonna die. And so there was a lot of rape for women, which is actually, the weapon of mass destruction when it comes to any war. You have soldiers raping the native women, and yet we were seen as the ones who were the rude ones, or who were the ones who were barbaric. So, that is called actually, cognitive dissonance, where you have to, as an oppressor, have to say, I am better off than this person, or I'm a better human being as this person. So if I do this to them, they won't even feel anything because they don't have emotions, or they don't grieve, or they are not connected spiritually, or we don't have the same God, because you have to justify a reason why you're doing what you're doing. That way you don't have a guilt conscious. So a lot of these things happen, but so we call it cognitive dissonance in psychology. So, but it was horrible. It's still horrible. So the number of victims, 64,870 witnesses. And this is reference from the Blue Book. Anybody can just maybe Google that and find it. This is, I know the numbers, the Nama people was half of the Nama population were exterminated, and more than half from the Herero people. I mean, we were 80,000, and then about 65 or 60,000 were exterminated. So that's like a big number of the Herero lives that were lost. So post-genocide, what happened post-genocide? This wasn't legally recognized as a genocide because of technicalities of the wording, and when genocide was actually, the word genocide was coined. So there was a lot of legal battles in terms of, was this a genocide, or was this just part of acquiring land and so forth. Reparations, nothing. This is why we're having these discussions. This is why we're trying to have these open discussions to help explain. This is why we're saying we need what we need, or we're not agreeing with what's happening, but you guys need to talk to us as a community. Like, listen, we were the ones injured, but you guys are talking to somebody else. Think of it like this. I come to Germany, and I put an extermination order for the whole Germans. And again, this is supposed to be, it's not supposed to be a triggering event. It might be, and I apologize in advance. I come and I say, okay, I exterminate the whole of Germany. And then when talks come, we're gonna say like, no, we're only gonna talk to Europe for Germany. We're not gonna talk to the Germans, we're just gonna talk to the whole of Europe as a continent. It's a bit unfair because not the whole of Europe was affected, but that specific part of Germany. So it becomes a painful sore. Already our ancestors or great-grandparents were suppressed and oppressed and enslaved, and their voices were not heard. They couldn't feel, they couldn't do anything. There was systematic oppression in that regard. So when we're having two governments talk on our behalf, the feeling is we're going through the same oppression again, and that puts the dent on what we get to see as some of the reactions of aggression and anger and all of this. So this is why some of these things are happening. So yes, migration, people had to migrate because of the war. We have a lot of people who we feel are very dear to us, especially us who are privileged to be in Namibia still, or born in Namibia, who are in the diaspora, in Botswana, South Africa, Angola. the United States, all over the UK, and anywhere else they find themselves, because we had to learn to migrate, we had to learn to survive, we had to learn somebody else's language to be able to actually be alive, but we never forgot who we are or who we were. We are, because we're still around, and it's unfortunate and it's sad when someone talks about you to someone else without trying to hear your point of view, when there's so many of us out there that's just trying to say, listen, we are still here, we matter, you guys are not talking to us, and that is not okay. It hurts us all over again. It's like another silent, unwritten genocide that's happening. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And I hope this was a little bit clear, or it's very clear to everybody to see. Next to that, yeah, so basically some of the things I do mention as I talk about it. So historical trauma, like I explained, the red experiment. If you could go to the historical trauma slide. You're going back up. Okay, so basically, all right, next to that one. If you guys are having a challenge, I could share my slides. Okay, the historical trauma slide, if possible. We could even just, I could start here, that's fine. So the effects of historical trauma and the first generation is basically witnessing or lived experiences, which is living in fear, starving, seeing your loved one die, not knowing what your future looks like, not knowing where you're migrating to, just because you don't either understand the language or just because you don't want to give land. And one thing, a lot of the time back then, there was respect for, this is Mashala's territory, this is Katira's territory. It was never, this is my land, this is my space. So it was a concept that was introduced by the oppressors or the colonizers for us as natives back then. Like, oh, okay, so we own land, that's not a thing. So all these demarcations and everything was completely new. And it was like, we had to understand what's happening without properly being explained to. So the first generation had to live through all this uncertainty, fear, not knowing what's going to happen. And for the survivors, grief, right? Unspoken grief, especially the Shark Island, the people, the things that they had to go through, seeing people being thrown over into the ocean for the sharks to eat them, and all of these atrocities, seeing people die along the railroad and being just buried in the dunes, all of this, we have a way that we grieve our people, you know, we say goodbye when you have a funeral. You don't have that. You don't have closure. You just constantly moving to survive, not knowing if you are the next or not. So all of this unexpressed grief, unacknowledged grief, unresolved grief, it can cross along generations. And this is why we're trying to have this conversation. Next slide, please. So yes, unresolved trauma symptoms could look like nightmares, hypervigilance, low self-esteem, poor parenting skills, because again, you know, survival of the fittest, you don't know. And so all of this we're trying to learn now, and we're literally getting there as well. There's a lot of guilt, depression, anger, and so forth. Thoughts of suicide as well. Again, all of these things could be genetic, could be through DNA, and also not knowing how to actually talk about it and cope with some of these emotional responses that we might have as a generation. But it could be because of, it could be a bigger symptom as a community because of what had happened 117 years back. You know, also Braveheart did a research on it, relational problems, because how do I actually have a proper conversation when my future looks like it's not even happening? So there's a lot of things that could be a result of that. Yes, we don't have proper research on it, but this is naturally the historical responses or symptoms to traumatic events or unresolved history, unresolved historical trauma. Next slide, please. Why do we want to talk about historical trauma or intergenerational trauma? To tell our story from our own narrative. It's one thing to hear about me from someone else. It's another to actually hear it from my point of view, because then you get to hear what actually is happening. Sorry about that. Yeah, so to hear about what's happening. And also the biggest thing is to begin the healing process. Every healing journey starts with a conversation. I am not okay, or this is why I'm angry. This is, you get to express yourself, you get to vent out, and then we try and find, okay, how best would the healing be for you? How best would what look for you? So it's about starting the healing process to move forward, to reclaim traditional cultural protective factors, things that used to be just to feel safe. Yes, we do have that right now, but to have a sense of, as a community, we were hurt, we know what happened, and now that we can actually acknowledge it and talk about it, we can as a group start to heal. And now we recognize this is why we might be doing certain things, and it doesn't mean that we are damaged. It just means that we didn't know that we could actually heal, because we didn't understand that we were broken because of what had happened, you know. And to stop identifying ourselves as victims. I think anybody that's ever gone through an atrocity, a painful experience, in that specific moment that you're going through that, you are a victim. The minute that it's the next day, you move from that to a survivor, right? So you transcending, you're becoming better, you're becoming a better human being once we have conversations, once we have healing starting. And it's not about, when we talk about the genocide, it's not that, oh my goodness, it happened years ago, you get over it. It's not that we are stuck on the genocide. Is we're saying you don't fully understand what happened to us or to me as a representative, but I need you to understand, so that you understand, if I react this way, you have an appreciation, you have an understanding, now you understand where I'm coming from, and from there you get me where I'm at, and then we can have the conversation onwards. You can't just decide for me, because you might decide this much and I'm not ready to be there. So it's that respect of I am, because we are, I am, I matter, I am human being. And it helps every single person out there to understand why it's so important to have an apology. Because it's one thing to say, okay, fine, that happened, I'm sorry. No, you need to approach me and tell me, do you fully get? If you meet me at where I am, because I tell you my own narrative, and you apologize at this level, then we can have a serious conversation. Then we can talk about every single thing out there, about healing, about reparations, about all of this. Because contrary to a lot of beliefs, we exist, we survived, we're victorious. We are one of the strongest communities out there. We don't fight for rights. We don't fight for a lot of things. I mean, we fight for rights, but we don't go out behind, and because we matter and we know our value. So this is why we're talking about, or why we're trying to have these conversations. We were broken, but we're starting to heal. But we need everybody out there, especially the German government, to fully understand where we're coming from. Okay, so yeah, so I believe this is my last slide. Could you go to the next slide? Yes, we matter and we exist. Okuhapa, thank you so much. That's our OGF page that you guys can click on. And I believe we'll take questions after everybody's done, if I'm not mistaken. But thank you so much for everybody tuning in and listening to this. I hope we all have a better understanding in terms of the traumatic experiences, or why it's important to fully get us. And this is just a short summary of it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marcella, for this absolutely stunning and indeed very touching presentation. I think all of us really appreciate it, at least I personally do. So thank you so much for that. And indeed, we will ask questions after everybody's done presenting. So if anyone in the audience has questions, please do post them into the chat. So now that we have heard a lot about historical and intergenerational trauma, we will move on and to the next speaker. He will tell us about the effects of the genocide on the descendants of the victims as well, and share the Nama perspective with us. So the next speaker is Gaup Martinez Fredericks. He's a direct descendant in a lineage of 12 generations of Gaup Akembi of the Amas in South Africa and Namibia, a traditional king of the Little Namas. So please go ahead, Martinez. The floor is yours.
Yeah, good evening to the listeners. I must just warn up front that my voice might give me a little bit of trouble, but I'll try to work through the presentation in time. Nadia, if you can put up the presentation.
It is put up, actually. Can you not see it? Martinez, can you see the first slide of your presentation?
I can't see it on my side. Yes, okay, I see it.
Okay, good.
Yes, and there's a particular reason why I put these three gentlemen up on my slides. All three of them have played a very particular role, and what I wanted to do is to give a face to genocide, because the one reason why I'm doing that is to say that I'm living in South Africa, and that's actually where all of these gentlemen were originally from. But what we experienced lately is there is almost a hard boundary in terms of information stopping at the Orange River. And it never used to be a hard boundary. It used to be a fluent boundary because our people used to move from South Africa to Namibia. In fact, there was never South Africa and Namibia. There was a little Namaqualand and a greater Namaqualand. On your right, the three people, the reason why I put him up is on your right-hand side is Gaup, David Christian Fredericks. Now, he was the Gaup of Bethany between the period of 1882 to 1880. And he was the second brother of Gaup Joseph Fredericks. Both of them married a Witboy Nama from Gibeon. And when Joseph passed on, his brother David Christian, he then married the same woman, and then she had 3 children from him and 3 from his other brother. So Cornelius, both Cornelius, that's Cornelius Fredericks on the far left, and David Fredericks are directly out of the lineage of David Christian Fredericks. And the reason for Cornelius Fredericks is that he was the last one that played a very pivotal role in the genocide itself. He was also the son-in-law of Captain Hendrik Witboy, because he was married to his daughter. And Chief Cornelius Frederick, he played a very, very pivotal role in the genocide itself, because he, after when the war started in 1904, and when the Nama extermination order was issued in 1905, then Hendrik Witboy asked Cornelius to join him in the war, and Hendrik Witboy was shot and killed very early in the war, and Cornelius, with only 300 Nama people, he basically fought with the German soldiers for the whole period between 1905 and 1907 until he was killed. And the strange part is that the Germans never really won the war. But what happened, they tricked him into make believe that the Germans wanted to stop the war, and they convinced him through one of the other chiefs to say, listen, let's put down your weapons, we'll take the numbers. And at the time when they did exactly that, they were surrounded by the German soldiers, and they were then marched from there down to Shark Island, which became Lutheran's Bay at a later stage. So it's just important that I give that a little bit of a background. Second slide. Najwa, can you move to the second slide? Now, just to give a little bit more perspective in terms of who are the Nkama people. The Nkama people are real people. Those are people with a long history that starts many years ago. And in South Africa, they used to be called Amakwas. Later, many of the colonial people couldn't make the click sounds like Aman, so they changed it to the N, which means Naman, little Nama. So, and the meaning of Amakwa actually means skin wearer of skin wearing people. And they occupied the whole territories of Namaland, Little Namaqualand, and the Greater Namaqualand. So there was no fixed boundaries. That was a fluent boundaries that people moved across the Orange River at will anytime they wish so. So around about 1797, Gaup Jacobus Fredericks I, he then migrated from a place called Gauteng in South Africa, and he then bought Quigandes from the Red Nation for articles that he made, because he also was a blacksmith, so he managed to make some articles out of that. And he bought then Quigandes, which later became Betani. And then 1804, Jacobus Fredericks II, he then left the Cape Colony and settled in Betani, and he was asked by General Johnson just around the Battle of Blouberg to come and assist, and it was only a one-day war, so he had then to, when he was ready to go and assist at the war, they told him that the war's over. So he then, with a number of the Nkama people from the Berg River area, moved over and they joined Jacobus Fredericks at Quigandes. And then around 1814, a missionary by the name of Heinrich Schmelen, he also then left the Cape Colony. He took with him Amra Lamberts, which was a descendant of Jacobus Fredericks. And they went to, he joined him in going to Betani. 1840, around about that time, Jan Jager Afrikaners settled at Windhoek from the Witzenberg area in the Cape Colony. 1850, Paul Goliath arrived at Bethany and settled at Beersheba. 1862, Kido Witwe arrived at Bethany from Pella and settled the region. The reason why I put those numbers there, can I have the second slide? The next one. This is just a visual, just to show that when we talk about people in diaspora, we need to understand what diaspora mean. The 5 groups that I was talking about, you could see beneath the Orange River, where they actually came from, and then above the Orange River in the in the Greater Namaqualand, where they've settled. So you could see the Nkama people from Betani. They come from between the Berg River. They migrated from between the Berg River and the Olifants River, and they settled at Quigandes in Betani. The Afrikaner family, they come from the Witzenberg area. They migrated also through Pella, through Betani, and they settled around about Warmbach and Windhoek. The Lamberts came from the Gauteng, Worcester area. They moved through Pella and they went to settle at Grobabus area. The Goliath family came from the upper Olifants River area. They moved through Pella, through Betani, and they went and settled at Beersheba. And then the Kobesan people, which is the Witbois from the Pella area, they went through Betani and they went to settle into Gibeon. So that is important to understand this whole mix, so that when we start talk about people in diaspora, it's important to understand that many of the people that were located with the genocide around 1904, 1908, they had already had relatives on both sides of the Orange River because there was the fluency between moving between the Little Namaqualand and the Greater Namaqualand. Next slide. So the million-dollar question now comes of why the Nama people? There's a simple reason for that. Many years back, already in around about 1652, there was this story where Krotoa told Jan van Riebeeck where livestock was finished in the Cape Colony. She said to him that there's a very powerful nation called the Amas or the Nama. They live in the kingdom of Monomatopa and they have access to immense wealth. And that stuck with a lot of people. So already at that time, plans started to emerge to get hold of the Ama people or the Nama people in the Namaqualand. So you'll see even in 1686, there was a trip out from the castle of Good Hope where Simon van der Stel went to the land of the Amaquas. And so the land of the Amaquas was basically divided up in two. Between the Orange River is the Little Nama, and above the Orange River is the Greater Nama. So secondly, Germany needed a colony to move their citizens to secure a safe route on the West Coast. That was the other reason why they were particularly interested in the West Coast. With the Berlin Congress, which was also called the Scramble for Africa, we know that the whole Africa continent was carved up, and between the British and the German, they agreed that each will take a part. So Britain then settled to take the Cape Colony, while Germany then had its eyes on Southwest Africa. And Germany was fully aware of the wealth of Southwest Africa. Very interestingly is that there was a role that was critically played by some of the, there was a role played by a lot of the missionaries. And Samuel Hahn, as a German missionary, was sent to Ebenezer in the West Coast to work among the Nama people, and that gave him access to the Nama language. So his son, Theophilus Hahn, then learned the language whilst he was born in Ebenezer. So while his father was working between Ebenezer in the West Coast in the Cape Colony and also the missioner of Bethany in Namibia, he learned to speak the Nama language. And by speaking the Nama language, he also learned of the immense wealth. Our people, remember, if you look at the diamond area, which our people used to count or used to teach the children to count with raw diamonds, and that was particularly interesting for the missionaries. And for that reason, then Theophilus Hahn wrote a letter to Adolf Luderitz, informing him of the wealth and instructed him to buy Angra Pequena at all costs. So therefore, in around about 1883, Adolf Luderitz arrived in Angra Pequena with a sales agreement to be signed between himself and Joseph Fredericks. Now, Joseph Fredericks at the time was the Gaup of Bethany, the southern part of Namibia. And then around about 1884, immediately after the signing of the sales agreement in 1884, the Germany declared Southwest Africa a German protectorate. So we then all know what happened after it was declared a German protectorate. Next slide. So Southwest Africa then became a German colony. Becoming a German protectorate gave the German government access to the Greater Namaqualand. So they started to sign protection treaties with various Namas and Hereros, And those treaties were never in any case honored, because those were protection treaties saying that we will protect you at any uh, imminent threat from anywhere else in exchange for certain things. So then all the prime lands and livestock were confiscated, handed to German farmers. Traditional communities was pushed into reserves. Various skirmishes ensued between the Germans and the Hereros initially, and at a later stage, the Namas got involved. And around about that time, there was a particular person with the name of Shepherd Stearman. He was a Khoi person born in Henke in the Eastern Cape. And he was also a pastor, so he managed to move around the northern part of Namaqualand between Hendrik Witbooi and some of the other leaders. And he sort of instigated them to say, but there's no reason why you should be treated like children and why you should be tolerating all these things that happen to you, the loss of your land. And that basically inspired this whole thing. And soon after that, the extermination order was then issued. If you look at the extermination order on your right-hand side, that is a copy of the original extermination order signed by Van Trotha. He then placed a price on the head of Hendrik Witbooi for about 5,000 mark. On Shepherd Stearman, he placed a price of 3,000 mark. And on the head of Cornelius Fredericks, he placed about 2,000 marks. So that basically kicked off the whole sort of Nama Herero, or the war of 1904, 1905 of the Namas. And that was, you can see that was signed on the 23rd of April in 1905. So Shepherd Stearman, a Cape Khoi pastor out of the Cape Colony, started a resistance program in Namaland. And in 1904, the Germans issued the extermination order against the Hereros. And in 1905, the same extermination order was extended to the Namas. And in the extermination order, like I said, they placed various prices on the three leaders. So the war started officially in 1904 and ended in 1908. Now, the impact of the war, I don't want to go too deep into what happened during the war, but we want to talk a little bit about the impact of the war. So the war really had serious implications for many of our people. Many speakers have already given some in-depth detail on what happened actually during the genocide. The actual loss of livelihood, the loss of ancestral land, the loss of economies, displacement of family members that finds themselves in diaspora. We all know that during the war 1905 or 1907, and in particular in 1907, when they set up camp in Angra Pequena, which became Ludra's Bay or Shark Island, they took a lot of the prisoners of war and transported them out of from the concentration camp, put them on trains and sent them to other countries like Cameroon, to Tonga, to Zimbabwe, to Botswana, and many of them flow back to South Africa. So that's why you find a lot of the people that has families that is directly involved in the genocide of the war. Some of their descendants, you find them now in all parts of Africa. But the ones that came back to South Africa have a particular problem. It all boils down to the destruction of the traditional tribal structures, the destruction of social cohesion, and in the generational trauma. I mean, I personally come from a family where I couldn't understand why my own father behaved the way he behaved. And he was only born in 1930, but he had something that bothered him for all the time. And I could sense there's something troubling him. a personal experience what there was that we could never settle for too long at one particular place because something always was chasing him. And I never understood what it was until now. When I started realizing that those are the impact of the war that happened between 1904 and 1907, that his parents' experience, which was then transferred from him, and I can categorically state I've seen that um, from my father going down to my brothers and sisters of mine in the family. So although none of us have been part of the war, we still feel we still feel the after effects of the. And the one thing that was never done, like Marcella earlier said, there's a need for healing. There's a need for canceling out the extermination order. If you take what the extermination order says, the extermination order basically say that all Nama and Herero people will be destroyed, men and women and children will be destroyed off the face of the earth, which means effectively that curse is still alive. And that plays itself out in the generational trauma that we experience currently today. It manifests in substance abuse, in teenage pregnancy. In South Africa, we have a particular problem with fetal alcohol syndrome. Now, can you imagine that if you are pregnant, you are forced to drink, you are you consuming, over consuming alcohol, the poor baby that is born will never have a future. It will never have a productive life. So that's the loss of a whole generation of people. So there was never a really a effort to redress the after effects of the genocide. And what we also experience is the exclusion of those in diaspora from those negotiation talks. While people talk now between Namibia and Germany, talks happen as if there is no people in diaspora, as if they are not affected by the war, if their descendants are not affected in any way. Next slide. Next, yes. So what I'm trying to say is the loss of livelihood, ancestral land, loss of destruction of social cohesion, substance abuse, fetal alcohol syndrome. Those are all the after effects of the war that plays itself out currently in many of our people. If you look at the Cape Flats, how people behave themselves, they enter into gangsterism. There's the constant seeking for identity, which it seems they can't find their identity, and that's why they're looking for identity amongst gangster groups, and they constantly fighting for territory. And one could trace that even back to those the after effects of the war. So the war did not only have an impact on Namibia, but it also had an impact on the people sitting currently in diaspora. And now you have the kind of agreement where the Namibian and German government talks about development fund only developing certain areas within Namibia, forgetting that the people in diaspora are suffering from the after effects of the war. And those are some of the issues that also needs to be addressed. Next slide. So in conclusion, what we're trying to say is that the genocide negotiations must be concluded. The communities cannot accept development fund only. Descendant communities and those in diaspora has to be actively part of negotiations. They need to break the generational curse of the extermination orders. They need to address the generational trauma through counseling and healing programs. And then there's a need to set up some sort of a fund for the descendants and their children that suffer from fetal alcohol syndrome. So these are things that cannot remain unattended. It needs to be attended at some point. So okay, that's in conclusion. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Martinez, for sharing this personal story of yours with us and all your explanations. Once again, I think I speak for all of us when I can say that I highly appreciate it. So thanks a lot. We will now proceed to the third and last speaker for tonight. So the third and last speaker will be Doris Roos. She is, as probably most of you know, a member of the Nama Traditional Authority Genocide Technical Committee. And she will talk to us about the intergenerational repercussions of sexual violence. So Doris, you can go ahead if you like. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Naja, and good evening to all the participants. Let's move to the next slide. This is basically just the outline of my presentation. I don't want to take too much time, so let's move to the next one. This is just to give you, also Martinez and both Martinez and Marcela gave a bit of a background, but just to show you that in the 1870s, before the start of the genocide, as I said last year, Germany was looking for a place in the sun, their own place in the sun, and sponsored, the German government sponsored 5 investigative trips to Africa. And now in 1903, after 20 years of colonization, there were basically only 712 European women living in Namibia, in Southwest Africa, as it was known then, with 3,970 European men in German Southwest Africa. So you can see the large number of men who were based in Namibia, German men that were based in Namibia, and European men that were based in Namibia, compared to the 712 women. So this gives you an idea that already that these men were now looking at the Nama and Herero women, the Namibian women that were there. Although rape by German men of Herero and Nama women was common prior to 1904, not a single case of a white man raping an African woman came before a German court. Next slide. Marcela already touched on the whole thing of the definition, so I'm not going to be looking at the definition. Let's look at the next slide. Oh, let me just quickly go back to the previous slide. When we experience any kind of trauma, we have both emotional and physical reactions, and this can look like anxiety, trouble sleeping, feeling disconnected, confused, having intrusive thoughts, withdrawing, but it's also affecting children. And for children, avoid going to school, problems with sleeping, eating, problems with eating, anger, and showing attention-seeking behaviors. These are all symptoms of trauma that a person can experience. Let's look at the next slide. I want to take you to the case of Luisa Kamana. This was the attempted rape and then murder of Luisa Kamana. Luisa Kamana was married to the son of Chief Zachariah, who was a Herero chief. The two gave a ride to a German settler who that night made sexual advances on Luisa. She refused. He killed her. The court acquitted him, and the case was appealed, and the settler was given 3 years in prison. Rape and murder of Herero and Nama women were common occurrences. So it was not a surprise when he was acquitted the first time. The case only went to trial because a chief's family member was involved. and no one among the Herero thought 3 years made up for a Herero woman's life and dignity was a fair sentence. Next slide. The thing is that for me as a human being, when I'm looking at what happened, the brutality beyond human comprehension. When concentration camps were established for the few survivors, one female-only camp was set up to service the German troops. In the other camps, along with sexual violence at the hands of settlers and troops, Herero and Nama women were forced to boil human heads, often of their own family members, and then to scrape off the flesh with shards of glass. When I want you to look at the pictures. Imagine being a mother, and this is the head of your child given to you. You have to remove the skin of this child that you gave birth to, so that the skull should be used for research or whatever purposes they felt. Imagine the trauma. Imagine what went through the mother's mind. How was she able to sleep? Let's look at the next slide. Prisoners were used for medical experiments, and their illnesses or the recoveries from them were used for research purposes. Experiments on live prisoners were performed by Dr. Boffinger, who injected Herero and Nama that were suffering from scurvy with various substances, including arsenic and opium. Afterwards, he researched the effects of these substances via autopsy. Experimentation with the dead body parts of the prisoners was rife. Zoologist Leonard Schulze noted taking body parts from fresh native corpses, which according to him was a welcome addition. And these are notes that they took and that is readily available. He also noted that he could use prisoners for that purpose. When we are looking at this and when we are reading, we are wounded people, and we all need to acknowledge the impacts of these brutalities. Let's look at the next slide. So when connecting the dots, now at this stage, recently there has been all this talk about what happened in Canadian schools and with Canadian Indians. Researchers found children of survivors exhibited traumatic responses ranging from, depression, suicidality, and anger, all the way to post-traumatic stress disorder. While some of this is expected as learned behavior, some of it could only be explained as inherited behavior. Just like the Indigenous people in Canada, intergenerational trauma has been passed on through generations of Nama and Herero. 100 years later, this trauma is embedded in every fabric of some of our communities. The Germans created the harm and the trauma by taking the land, the cows, by raping the women, by killing husbands and children, forbidding the local cultural practices that people could have participated in to heal the pain and to undo the pain caused by the concentration camps and the trauma coming from the concentration camp. So the impact from trauma occurred, but the results of the trauma itself, the healing practices did not take place as it should have taken place. What remained was the pain. The family structure, rather than being where we were used to make use of the kinship model, where everybody was taking care of brothers and sisters, and so that was not existing, because practicing even cultural practices were forbidden. And all this has contributed to the trauma that everybody is feeling. The pain has not subsided. It has been carried over. If you think the example that I gave, a mother given her child's head to scrape off the skin of that child, and she has maybe 2 kids whose heads she was given to clean, and maybe 3 other kids that are alive. So how was she going to relate to the 3 surviving kids, knowing she had to remove the skin of her own flesh, children that she gave birth to, or the flesh of her husband? The emotions, how many tears did she cry? How many sleepless nights did she have? And how was she able to be a competent mother to the children that was the surviving children? Was she able to show them love? Was she able to feed them? Was she able to reach out? How was she supposed to show any connection with the pain that she was carrying? And the children that survived, how were they able to even feel the love of their mother if she was not able to provide that, emotionally connect with them and bond with them because of her own pain? So these children grew up seeing the pain of the parents, of the mother, not knowing how to show emotions. They grew up, they continued, got their own children, but not being able to show emotions, that numbness, the pain that they have experienced over the years, that has been carried over generation after generation after generation. Let's look at the next slide. So it means, what does it all mean? It means that we can view the psychological effect of trauma being transferred from one generation to the other. We never had counseling. We never knew we could talk. It was even possible that many of them were not even, while they were going through the pain, they were probably not even allowed to talk. They were probably not even allowed to reach out or to communicate with each other, to share the pain. So generational trauma is a traumatic event that began decades prior to the current generation and has impacted the way that individuals understand, cope with, and heal from the trauma. Generational trauma gives us the lens to connect the dots and to wonder whether this problem is a family problem, is a tribal problem, and from where we have to ask the questions. We need to engage, and we need to know how can we break it, because we see the impact of it generations and generations and generations later. We still see the impact of it. How can we break the cycle? Let's look at the next slide. If we look at it, and this is not, there is no research, but as a social worker, and from what we are seeing and the cases that are coming and that we are talking and counseling, providing counseling, sometimes there's just this feeling of emotional numbness. It's a vicious cycle that has continuously that has continued over the years. There is alcohol abuse, substance abuses. There is violent ways of discipline that people think it is okay to discipline their children in such violent ways. Feelings of losing control, not having land, not having anything that they can say, this belongs to us, not having inheritance from the parents, ancestors, from whoever. You look today at the Germans that are living in Namibia, they have inherited for generations, that wealth has been passed on from the one to the next generation to the next generation, but they did not come with cows to Namibia. So unresolved issues culminating in anger outbursts. There are so many questions that you are wondering, how can we deal with this? And how can we heal the wounds? Because the wounds are still open. It opens each time I see a picture of a German soldier proudly posing with my malnourished ancestors in chains. It opens each time I think about the unimaginable pain still lingering when I see a skull and I remember a mother or a wife was tasked to remove the skin from that skull. And I think, how many tears did that person, did that mother cry? How fulfilling was it for her, and to fulfill the task of her German master? So these are emotional questions that we do not have answers for, even in this day and age. If it is so traumatizing to me today, how did that mother feel when she had to do it at that stage? Next slide. So it might have been over 100 years, but for us, the seat, we live through it every day. We will never forget. We will carry the torch to honor them for the price they paid, because their blood waters our freedom. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Doris, for this presentation. I don't really think there's anything to add to that anymore from my side. So I just want to cordially thank all the speakers who presented tonight, and we will now proceed to questions. As far as I've seen, there's been quite an ongoing discussion in the chat. However, I'm not sure whether any questions for the speakers have arisen up until this point. So if there's someone who has a direct question to one of the speakers, or indeed Wahahisa Katira, who's actually also a guest, so the person can answer as well, then please go ahead and share your questions with us in the chat. I think especially considering the depth and the emotional depth of this topic, this is quite quite a special chance to get to ask a question right now to the descendants of the genocide survivors. I'll just give it a couple of more minutes, since it might be quite hard for the listeners to process what we've just heard. So if any of you in the audience still come up with any kind of question, please go ahead and let us know. So Julia is asking, Marcella and Joris, What are the impact on the perpetrator, the German soldier acting on instruction to kill?
Doris, would you like me to take that one?
I think it's if you look at the pictures and what the pictures are portraying, and if you also look at, you read the Blue Book and you read the notes of the German soldiers, and it seems like they were so conditioned to think that this was something. Blacks don't feel any pain. They don't deserve to be treated in any better way. So either they were completely ignorant, but the impression that you get from it is that for them, it was just, they were just following instructions and they were enjoying it. If you read at what the German doctor was saying, that it was a good thing. So I don't know whether they needed any counseling after all the atrocities they have committed in Namibia, because after Namibia, you still have the Holocaust that continued. So somehow I think something also went very wrong in the minds of the German masters, or whatever you can call them. But I just think that there was very serious mind control conditioning that took place, that they could imagine, that they could think what they were doing was acceptable. So it's gonna be, it's an interesting question, and I really don't know how to answer, because I have never looked at it from their side, because the pictures that I'm seeing is that there was a lot of pride in them posing with these Africans in chains, with these malnourished children. How do you do that? And that's why I'm saying, when you're looking at these things, it's beyond human comprehension. The type of brutalities that's beyond human comprehension.
Just to add to what Doris just had mentioned, I think one of the key things I might have mentioned was the cognitive dissonance, or reasoning or understanding, which is, if I condition you in a way to understand that the natives don't have a soul because they don't believe in God, so there's no moral issue there. So it becomes an easy thing for any perpetrator organizer to then actually exterminate or kill, right? Yes, because at the end of the day, everybody has humanity, but you need to get a reason to understand why these people or these groups of people deserve to die. And if you are conditioned, like Doris mentioned, if you are conditioned in such a way that they are not human beings, they don't feel, they don't have a God, there's no morality to them. If they die, their souls don't go to heaven. This is why we had to bring Christianity to them, and there's so many layers to it. Then you get an understanding to say, okay, then I'm not actually gonna kill someone, I'm just, so hence the reference was, we were savages, right? I can't be a human being if I'm a savage, right? It means there's so many layers to it for me to be recognized as that. So that in itself became the reason why they could execute the extermination order the way they did. Now, we are also not forgetting that you did have some soldiers who had moral issues, and also they were traumatized because of what happened, and that there could be a picture to them also, like, we feel guilty, we feel horrible, I can't believe that the person that I idolized actually did this, and these people are actually human beings, and that could be another discussion on its own. But we do know that at the time that was appropriate, especially the 4 years, and even after that, you had to be conditioned. There should have been an understanding for you to feel superior, for you to feel like you're better than this person, and it with the conditioning, the whole cognitive dissonance thinking patterns at the time. So yes, because what happened here is not what people understood on the other side. So if you're going to be told that if you go to Namibia, you're going to be killed by savages, you're going to try and protect your honor because you are the great whatnot, right? So you want to maintain that. It's like pride thing. So there's that to it as well. There's that whole element to it. So there's a lot there as well, if you really want to delve into it.
Okay, thank you. As far as I've seen, Julia actually asked a follow-up question on that as well, which is, how does that translate into behavior and attitude of Germans towards Nama and Herero? And I'm just kind of guessing that she's referring to today, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so that is the question in case someone would like to answer.
I think I think there has been some changes, and people are looking at things differently, maybe because the world is watching and more people are aware of human rights. But there has been also quite a few annoying and greatly disappointing comments coming from Germans in Namibia when this whole genocide discussion started. So I still feel there is a complete disconnect between what happened and they feel. Yeah, there has been a complete disconnect between what has happened and them not understanding why we still are talking today in this day and age about it. So I think there is definitely also a need to educate the Germans in Namibia about the atrocities and how it has impacted our lives.
Nanja, I believe Katire would also like to respond to this question. He's also one of the panelists.
Oh, sure. Katire, please just go ahead. Just unmute yourself and react to anything you would want to react to. So please feel free to go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. As a person who went to a German based school, I learned German for like 5 years. And as a result, also learned a lot about the German culture. And one thing I noticed is that when you look at the German surnames, like the predominant ones or the famous ones, you look at surnames like Richter, which is translating to judge. Marita can correct me if I'm wrong somewhere there. But I think surnames like Schultz is mayor, Müller, the miller, Kraus, like the curly one or curly-haired one. So when you look at most surnames in Namibia, like for example, my personal one, my surname is Katire, translating to he did not die. And this comes from my ancestor who was hanged, but then did not die that day. So when you look at where we get our surnames, it gives you a light to where we get our pride when we are doing what we're doing. So if you are a German person named after like a strength, like if you are named after a strength in Germany, that means when you are in Namibia, you are representing that strength. So there was a sense of honor and dignity in what you are doing. You understand? So I feel like, yes, the human aspect was there to feel bad for what I'm doing, but the loyalty was to who I was to where I got my surname. The most loyalty was to, I need to make my commanders proud. I need to make people back home proud. I need to show that I am a Kaiser, for example. when you translate that surname to like a ruler. So when it comes to the choice of me or you, definitely the German soldiers would choose you, which is the victim, because if I am Richter, for example, which is judge, I can't go back home and say I lost. So it's like it's sort of I'm bringing shame to the surname. So that's I want us to understand that that is something that might have affected the German soldiers to be one-sided or to be one-minded or to dehumanize the situation or something like that. I just wanted to add that aspect to the answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Kateria. We have received 2 more questions from what I can see for now. So I will continue with Anna Hobby-Brunken's question. So she's asking, do children in Namibia learn about this genocide at school? Is there an overall understanding of German colonialism? And then she adds, because I did not learn anything about German colonialism in school, unfortunately, and it makes me really angry, to be honest. Do you know if there are any programs or initiatives in Germany who teach about this at schools? Okay, I'm assuming she's German. So would someone like to answer her question?
Yeah, I think but this is one of the big injustices in our own country. And this is why we feel we can't keep quiet and allow this to continue. Because one of the things is that the narrative currently is as if that any changes, any resistance only started in the 60s, and they are forgetting about, and it has not been recorded. There is, I think, 1 or 2 sentences in history books, but it's mentioned in passing. So we really need to rewrite the narrative of the history of our own country. And equally, it's important for the rest, because for us now, we feel like we have to educate the rest of the world, including the rest of Namibians who are not from the Namas and the Hereros, that they need to be educated on this, because this is something that we are working on and that we want to change. But unfortunately, it is not in any of the history books.
Okay. Thank you so much for the answer, Doris, and thank you very much for your question, Anna. We appreciate it. Then someone else is asking, actually the next question is for you, Martinez. I will just read it out loud. As the Nama in the diaspora, what confidence do you still have now after it is clear that the envisaged German-Namibia reconciliation agreement does not mention those in the diaspora? Doesn't the state sovereignty pose as a technical challenge to the diaspora?
Wow, that's a very relevant question. I don't know whether I have the answer for that question, but it really does bother me. It really does bother me, and it does bother many other people in diaspora, because if like in my previous discussion, I alluded to the effects of the descendants of the victims of the war, and if I look at them today, it's heartbreaking. People, and they themselves don't understand where it's coming from, but it's been passed on from one generation to the next generation, and as if like they've been locked into something that they don't understand. So yes, there's no way that any agreement can be taken without considering people in diaspora. I mean, I talk in particular about the people in South Africa, but there's the descendant that was the descendant of the victim that was put on trucks and trains to go and build railroads in Cameroon, in Tongaat, in Botswana, and those people are stuck there. So there's definitely a need to make sure that those people are part of the negotiations and sits around the negotiating table.
Thank you so much, Martinez. Actually, speaking of that, there's a follow-up question, I believe, from Julia. As a diasporian, what might be a trigger to you personally regarding the agreement on the table currently? You don't need to answer anything if you don't want to, hey? Just for you to know.
Yeah, look for me. I've been part of the discussion through my family in Bethany for quite some time. Remember the initial matter was raised between Rokoro and Chief David Fredericks of Bethany. And I've been appointed officially by the family in Bethany to represent the people in diaspora in the South Africa side. So I've been part of the discussions from this side. Although we've, with the court case, we signed a jointer to say that we mandate the people in Namibia to speak on our behalf, but it becomes very, very clear that we have to find a voice for ourselves, and even assisting or supporting the processes within Namibia. It cannot be only in Namibia. Our people in diaspora needs to raise our voices to make understand that it's not a battle that can be fought quietly in a corner. There's many, many more of us sitting all over the world in diaspora. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Martinez. Julia, I hope your question is answered. If you have any follow-up questions, please just add them in the chat and then we will get back to you. I think for now, at least as far as I am aware, we have answered the question. Oh, okay, there's one more question. Thank you, from Edmund Sturman. I'll just read it out loud once again. Avoiding taking responsibility for what happened will not bring healing to the Nama and the Khoikhoi and the San people, won't bring healing to our nation. Why don't the German government approach the actual descents of the affected communities? Okay, who would like to answer? Danny, I think you're raising your hand. If you have something to add or you want to take the question, please just go ahead, unmute yourself and answer.
Thank you, Nadia. I actually have a different proposition with respect to what we have just discussed. First of all, I do applaud you and the leaders for hosting this chat, because this is history that has never been made known to any of us. We have heard about it, but it is the same as in South Africa, where we've had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but this Truth and Reconciliation Commission has never touched on the plight of the indigenous people, the Khoi and the San, similarly as the Herero and the Nama. My proposition is that in order for us to have healing and restoration of the spirituality and the restoration of identity of the Nama and the Herero people, we really need to have a look at having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, whereby the German government and the Namibian government can facilitate the different commissions in order to have a legal action on the table. We cannot proceed unless we have all the information on the table, so moving forward to restore the dignity of the Namibian indigenous people. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you, Danny. Is there anyone else who would like to add something regarding this?
Naja, can I maybe add to that?
Please go ahead, Martinez.
Yeah, that what is very interesting about the question is that the truth and reconciliation is a good idea, but there's also something else that bothers me. In the period when the Nama and Herero genocide was taking place in Namibia, the British government on the Cape Colony side was looking on from this side and not actually did anything to try and assist. Remember, many of the people had to flee Namibia, and we know that there was actually hard borders set up so that people cannot enter South Africa, enter South Africa from the Namibian side. So somehow there's also a responsibility from the British government then in terms of taking ownership for what happened, especially along the Orange River, on both sides of the Orange River. The other thing that bothers me also is the silence of the South African government with regards to all of this. Remember, after the Treaty of Versailles, South Africa became South Africa take over the administration of Namibia, and they took over from the German government. So they were actually in control of everything, which means that there's a responsibility from the South African government, even if it means through their departments, need to facilitate some assistance for the people in diaspora in getting to the negotiating table. That's one of the things that we absolutely need to investigate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to add something? If so, please just feel free to go ahead. Okay, if that's not the case, then we have another question, which is, why should Herero and Nama need to have a visa to fly to Germany while the Germans don't need any visa? And then the person who asked the question added, if this is the case, then they must leave this country. So is there anyone who would like to answer this question?
I think so much. It's a question for us. I think it's more type of a self-reflecting question. So we don't have, definitely, we are not in a position to respond to that question. Danny has his hand up.
Yeah, Danny, please just go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, at least I can hear you, so I think it should be fine.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question as to why the preferential treatment to the Germans. It is a normal procedure for every government in the world to have a system of exit and income into a country. The answer will be in the Constitution of Namibia. The various department deals with that issue. It cannot be that any person from outside the country comes in without a visa, and your own people cannot do the same. There is a problem there, and that most definitely needs to be confirmed. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So yeah, as we're about to exceed the time limit, I think it's a good moment to leave this very highly problematic and somewhat traumatizing topic for tonight. So I just want to ask again, especially to the panelists, is there anything any one of you would still like to add? Maybe to, you know, give yourselves some closure for now, at least for tonight, and perhaps, you know, give closure to the listeners for tonight. And we will still keep, you know, discussing these topics and anything like really regarding the genocide in the following 2 sessions. To all the listeners, we will not have an online event next week, but then we will have the next one like the week after that. So there will be another online event on the 1st of September and then another one on the 8th of September. And on the 8th of September, we are aiming for an exchange with German Namibians and the descendants of the German perpetrators. So once again, does anyone still want to say something? I think everybody would appreciate it. So if you do, please just go ahead.
No, thank you. That's all we can say from my side. Thanks for the participants and thank you so much for participating.
I think for me, I would like to say this was really, really heavy for the 3 of us as well to do this, because we appreciate what is not always spoken about. And for every person that joined in today, take a moment of silence. If you were triggered, listen to some good music if that's your routine. Maybe be in a quiet room for a minute. To just appreciate what you're going through, because that's real. And if you need to lie down, lie down. This was not to make anybody feel guilty or literally re-traumatize them. The conversation was about making it aware to everybody about the finer details of what's happening and why we react the way we react and why we are the way we are as the 2 communities. So just take time out, do something that's relaxing. You know, if you need a warm shower, take a warm shower, but take care of yourself right now. Just so that you're it's about self-control and self-emotion and self-care. So just do that, even if it's for 15, 20 minutes. But we don't want to leave you triggered and traumatized. And if you do need to call someone just to feel better or so, just do so. It's allowed, where you feel safe. But thank you so much for making time to listen. We appreciate, because everybody here right now is an ally in our struggle to actually get justice for what we're going through. So thank you so much and have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you. Just in closing from my side is thank you, Naja, for the opportunity just to bring a little bit of a different voice into the conversation, because for far too long, the voices of the people in diaspora, and particularly in South Africa, was not much heard in the genocide discussion. And that create almost the impression that there is no voice on this side of the like I said earlier, we used to have a soft border. Our people used to move across the Orange River, and this is very traumatic for people. You have families that live on both sides, but the one is now called the Namibian, the other one is called the South African, but they are cut from the same cloth. So yes, thank you for that opportunity, just to air a little bit of that frustration, but also to say that the battle around the genocide is very, very far from over, not from from within Namibia and also, I believe, work from outside of Namibia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And from my side, I once again want to cordially thank, obviously, the audience and everybody who listened, and especially the people who asked questions. But my very special thanks go to the panelists of tonight. And I really appreciate that you were going through this, you know, again, emotionally in order for educating others, and that you took the time and that you had the emotional strength to present all of this to us and to, you know, educate others by going through your own pain again. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, so I guess that's it for tonight. Once again, thank you so much to everybody who participated. And as Marcella said, please take care of yourselves tonight. Please make sure not to leave this session traumatized. Take care of yourself. And we wish you a very pleasant evening. We hope to see you again, and all the best from our side. Goodbye.